Hello everyone, a lot of you have been enjoying my 2024 refresher guides for the Division 2. Some of these have been some beginner guides as well for new and returning players, and I have another one for you today. Today we're talking all about settings. So what are the best settings on the Division 2 for 2024? I do play it on PC, so in the video today is going to be a lot of PC settings that you're going to see. If you do play on Xbox or PlayStation, that's okay. There's still going to be a lot of settings in there for you as well, but you'll see PC related stuff that is unrelated also. I discuss PC crashing as well with some tips around that, and I'm basically just going to go over all the settings, things that I advise, and anything that you may just want to know what it actually is. So that is today's video. I do hope you enjoy it. So we're going to start with the audio settings and then go through each one of these tabs. I'm not going to go over absolutely everything, just what I recommend as we go through. And at the end, once I've done all this, I'm going to discuss the PC crashing issues. I've got a tip that I learned as soon as last week. It's something completely new to me that can help with the PC crashing. So if you're interested in that, stick around to the end. So starting with audio, this is all self-explanatory. You know what this is: master volume, volume. You can change all this to your preference. Do take note of mix type here. Make sure you got this right, whether you're using home cinema, TV speakers, or headphones. I use headphones. I make sure it's selected on headphones so I get the right audio mix for headphones. You can mute audio when focus is lost. I think this is for like PC really. If you go into a different app or something, you go to a different window, it'll mute the audio in game so it's not playing. Not that bothered, so it's off. And then there's VoIP. This is quite an important setting because this is basically your voice in game. I have it turned off because I'm always in Discord. I'm not that bothered about it, so I disable it. But if you want to have voice in game, this has to be to know. You can change all your volume settings. You can enable your microphone or disable it. And then on top of that, right at the bottom, you've got the dark zone VoIP. So when you're playing PvP, a lot of people like to be able to interact with other players in the dark zone. Make sure this is selected to all if you want to be able to do that. You'll be able to talk to each other. They can talk to you, you can talk to them, you can have a bit of banter, have a bit of fun, and go about your business in the dark zone. What you can also do here, if you enable VoIP, is just to have it as allied only as well. This means if you don't want to engage with others in the dark zone, only your current squad that you're playing with, you'll only talk to the people that are in your squad. So select those settings to how you want. My personal preference, as I've already discussed, is just to have VoIP off. Moving over to controls, a lot of this is going to be personal preference, mouse sensitivity, mouse aim sensitivity. With this, a lot of this goes by your DPI mainly. I think my DPI is set at 1500 and I have my mouse sensitivity at 20. Mouse aim sensitivity at 5. I have mouse acceleration off and mouse smoothing 0. When I played around with these, I noticed subtle differences, but nothing major, and this is where I finished with it. But you'll want to play around with all these in your DPI to decide what is best for you. Then there's the gamepad. If you're playing with a gamepad on PC or if you're playing on console, you've got your look sensitivity, aim sensitivity, and again, that's going to be your preference where you want that at. I won't take any notice of what I've got here. I don't use controller on PC, so I've not played with them. The scope sensitivity modifier is very good if you like sniping, for example, because you can have a certain sensitivity for your assault rifle, but then if you switch to a weapon like a sniper rifle where you're going to be scoping in, you can lower that sensitivity, which I have done. I've set it as 2. So you want to play around with this if that is your play style, so you can just get better aim stability when you are sniping, going from using an AR or something like that. I always recommend when using a controller, you have gamepad vibration off. I've never understood having this on a shooter because why would you want anything to kind of interfere with your aim? Again, personal preference, but I'd turn that off. Then you've got the dead zones on your analog sticks. So this is important to me. I always have, when I do use controller, I play on PlayStation 5, I set this at 0. So left stick and right stick 0, and all this means is when I start moving my analog sticks, it's gonna count right away. I'll notice movement on screen rather. If I was to select, say, a higher number here, it's gonna add a dead zone to the analogs where when I slightly move them, it's gonna do nothing. And the higher the number, the bigger the window it's gonna be that it does nothing. each to their own, and again, personal preference in a way, but I'd always have these at 0. And one other thing you can use this for is correcting stick drift on a controller. If you start to get stick drift, you can use this to counter it. Normally, stick drift is only affected by a very slight movement that the controller thinks the stick is doing. So say my right stick started drifting, I could increase the dead zone on that just to counter that, and that'd fix the drift rather than replace the controller. So pretty decent settings to use there for stick drift. And yeah, you can disable the gamepad here. That's just if your PC are using keyboard and mouse and the gamepad's plugged in, you can disable it. There's inverted controllers and all that sort of stuff. Everything else is pretty much self-explanatory here, and it's all down to personal preference. We're going to move on to graphics now, and obviously it's going to have a lot of PC related stuff in here, and it's going to depend on what sort of PC you are running. So I have quite an old rig. I'm running a 1080 Ti graphics card. I've got a Ryzen 7 CPU, and I've got 16 gigabyte memory. So it's a bit of an old one, but I am able to get some high settings and still have some good frame rate. So brightness, personal preference, I just keep it at 10, but my contrast 15. I always have VSync off. You got to turn this on if you need to with the screen tearing or whatnot, but if you have it off, it will improve your performance. I have no frame rate limit on, and then you can see my settings here. I've got like very high, ultra. There's a lot of high and ultra settings that I'm using, and I'm able to with all that, I'm able to get a very consistent 80 to 90 frames per second. I know that doesn't sound too high, but you got to take into account I'm using a very old graphics card and it's not the most up-to-date system, and I don't think 80 to 90 frames are too bad. If I lowered some of these settings, I could definitely improve that. I'm happy with where it is at. So you're going to want to go through these settings and just make sure you're checking what your frame rate is with and how the game performs with where you want it to be at. Don't be afraid to setting it to medium to get the best performance, you know. And if you do want to check your frame rates while you're playing, if you just press Shift and F2, this is going to bring up your Ubisoft Connect overlay, providing that you have that enabled, which you should do. And from here, you can click on settings, and then in the settings menu, you can display an FPS counter in game. So just select that, and while you're playing, play around with all these settings and just find out where your FPS is at and the performance is at and where you want all these different things to be. A couple of settings that can really help you out though if you are running on an older system and you do want to keep the high settings and not drop everything. Just try things like particle detail first. Try dropping that to normal than just doing everything. And also you got the reflection quality there. And if we scroll down a little bit more, we've got things like water quality. I'll drop those first before anything else to see what difference they make. And if you're still struggling for frames performance, you then want to go to other things and keep dropping them. You can see what I use here, and it's depending on your system what you're going to be able to do. I do want to talk about a few more settings here though, because there's a few things that'll be on console as well. Not sure if this one is, but depth of field I have off. Basically, it says it there. You turn this on or off, and the simulation of the camera's range of focus. Objects outside the range of focus are blurred. This just prevents the system from doing more work than is needed, really. And it's just not going to blur things that are in a distance. You don't really notice it when you're playing. It's like motion blur. It's always good to turn stuff like that off, I believe, especially when playing PvP or streaming a game as well. If you're streaming a game, motion blur is actually recommended to turn off. So that's a nice and easy one you can turn off to save some resources there. You go further down on graphics, you have neutral lighting. I always have this off, but a top tip if you do raids on the Division 2, a lot of people will turn this on for the Morozova boss fight. Just improves all the lighting a little bit. And if you do play the Division 2 and you play Iron Horse a lot and not Morozova, you have the mortars on the ground that come and hit you. When neutral lighting is on, these are so much easier to see. Something like you might want to play with for that and maybe other aspects of the game, but in general, you'll have that off. And there's nothing else there that I really want to talk about. I think everything else, as I said, is quite self-explanatory and you'll figure out for yourself. Moving on to video, again, a lot of PC settings here. You'll always want to play on full screen mode if you can, and my resolution is 1080, so that's what I've got it set to, and my monitor refresh rate is 165 Hz. You'll want to get this set up for whatever your monitor refresh rate is. While we're talking about refresh rate though, if you have changed your monitor recently or it's the first time you're playing the game on PC, you want to make sure your NVIDIA settings match up. So in the search bar, if you just search for NVIDIA control panel, I've opened it up recently. And when you bring the NVIDIA control panel up, you're looking for the display section on the left-hand side of this control panel here and change resolution. I've got 2 monitors and a capture card connected to this. The main monitor I use for the game is this one here that's selected. You want to make sure that you've got the right resolution. So I just want PC 1080, which is recommended as well. And you want to make sure the refresh rate is the maximum that it can be, which mine is 165 Hertz. This was not set up like this at default. By default, it was up here somewhere and only at 60 Hertz. So I wasn't getting the maximum refresh rate that I could. So you do want to make sure you check these settings. And sometimes with updates and things like that, they can change. So you may want to check this from time to time just to make sure it stays how you want it to stay. And with that, that just links in with the in-game refresh rate that you select, which I'm able to select at 165. I notice that this changes sometimes because when I go through the settings, this goes back down to like 60 or something like that. So when I notice that, I'll just double check that everything is how it should be. A little bit further down here, we can enable reduced latency, which reduces the input latency but may cause lower frame rate. I have this to no. I notice no difference whatsoever when I have it on no, and it increases the frame rate. So why not? Play around with that and see what happens. Obviously, you do want the latency to be low. And if you don't notice anything, it's best to have that as no. You have the DX12 renderer here. I have this set to off. I guess you're meant to have it set to on. However, one of the things we're going to talk about at the end about PC crashing, if you do suffer with a lot of PC crashes, this can help you with that. If you set it, the renderer to off, like I have, it can solve some of the crashing issues. Not for everybody, but for a lot of people, it's one of the things that you recommend. So turn this off. HDR, obviously you want this on, right? HDR is great if your monitor or your output supports it. Make sure you turn this on. But when you're streaming like I do, I don't have a capture card that enables me to pass through HDR, so I have to have this off. But on top of that, I've had a lot of people have issues with the display on the Division 2 where there's kind of like a grayscale over the image or it's blotchy and things like that. If you are having like a coloring issue and you're wondering what it is, then it could be HDR. So even if it's supported, just come and play around with your HDR settings to see if that fixes it. Switching it off is a great way to just test that right off the bat, because if it's selected to off and it fixes the issue, you know it's around HDR. You don't have key mapping on PC. We're not going to go over that. That's all personal preference. So we're now going to move on to gameplay. A lot of this again is just all personal preference, like it is with many settings. So select these where you want them to be at and just test them if you need to. A few things to take note of: show damage numbers should be turned on by default. Make sure this is on, otherwise you're not going to see the damage numbers when you're shooting. And one of the questions I get asked a lot is, how do I make the damage numbers appear like they do on my screen? We'll go over that in a few settings because it's only in the in-game settings, which we'll cover in a few moments. But on the screen, scrolling further down, something that I really recommend that you do, and by default it's not done, is the additional field of vision. You see it's max here at 25. This is on console as well. And the additional field of vision while aiming is maxed at 25. But basically what this means is just how much you can see on your screen. If the lower it is, the more zoomed in you kind of gonna be, and you're not going to see as much around you. Whereas with the more field of vision, although on PC it is going to use more resources, so again you might want to test this with your frames and how it's performing, but the more field of vision, the more you can see, and I think that's a benefit to the player. So max these out, and if you are playing PC, just check that on your performance. There's also like a motion sickness mode here, and there's an enable signature weapon swap effect. When you switch to your signature weapon, there's this effect. If you don't like that, you can turn that off here just to make that a more, I don't know, simpler process again, just to change weapon. The rest of the settings we're not really going to go over. Benchmark, third party, or language, it doesn't really matter. If there's anything you need in there, go and check it out. I've never touched them at all. Benchmark just tests where your PC is at pretty much. But the accessibility settings, for those that are wondering how accessible the game is, this is what you get. You can have larger text chat, higher contrast UI, speech to text chats there. There's a speech recognition mode. I'm guessing you might need a peripheral for that. There's text to speech chat, menu narration. If you have that on, there's volumes and things like that. There's a colorblind mode, message alert, subtitle size, subtitle contrast, and colored subtitles. So you can change all these for any accessibility needs that you have. We're now going to switch over to in-game settings and have a look at that. So when in-game, if you do bring up your in-game menu, you have settings here as well. More of the same, everything we've just been over, but you're going to notice an additional tab, which is UI. There's a few settings here that you can change while in-game. So there's like dual monitor and large UI, anchor UI. But the settings that I say are most important, the ones that I use here, is the raid speedrun UI. If you're doing raids, it's going to put like a little counter on your screen so you can see what time it's taken to complete the raid or individual sections of the raid. I really like that. You can have that on or off. But the scrolling combat text, this is the most asked question I get in screen, is how are my damage numbers displayed as they are? And if we just come to the firing range, you can see that my damage numbers are just coming off to the side of where I am shooting. This is called floating damage numbers, and that's a selection I've got in the settings, and I really like them appearing like that. So if you also want them like that, just make sure you go on floating. By default, it is random spear, and if we have a look at that, this is how they look by default. And I think this is why people really like the floating and notice it, because look how much smaller they are and you're not really taking note of them as much, I guess. If we go back into the settings, the other option that you have other than floating or random sphere is 2D. And 2D looks like this. Very similar to the random sphere, to be honest with you, but a little bit bigger, but all over the place in the center. Floating is definitely where I like it, and I just think it looks neat on the side there. I can easily see the damage numbers that I am doing. And that's pretty much all I have for you for the in-game settings. I hope that has been helpful. I do just want to move on to some settings with the PC chat box. So again, this is PC, not console. But when you're in game, if you press enter, you're going to bring up this chat box. You can chat with clan members, you can chat with server or your group that you're running with, anything like that. But if you click this little arrow here, there's certain things you can change here that will appear in the chat box, which not a lot of people know about. No, I didn't know about it until I was told about it. You can change the format of it. You can change what notifications come up in the chat box. So under notifications, I've got my progression, emote messages. I'll show my loot that I pick up and show my group's loot. So whenever I loot and my group loot, I can see what we're looting. I'll see any emotes they're doing to each other, and I'll see any progression that I get. If I get like a field proficiency cache or level up or anything like that. Going down, you can also turn on combat info, so death info will appear in this chat box for you, and also damage numbers. So you'll see that with damage numbers, as well as I got floating. If you look at the bottom left hand side of the screen, my damage numbers are also showing up there. So say I am kind of like testing builds and damage out, and I miss it on the floating, I can just bring up the chat and scroll through my recent damage numbers. They are all there for me to inspect and to test builds and things like that. So I really like having that on in the chat box. You have chat feedback that you can change there. You can mute certain channels. I have district, DZ, social, and conflict muted. It's got group, clan, and whisper open. And you got accessibility again. You can have large font, high contrast, menu narration, group text to speech, and group speech to text. So some different settings you can have for this PC chat box. Just a couple of more things now that people do ask about a lot in my streams, just before we move on to talk about PC crashing again, another potential fix for that. We're going to start off, we bring up the menu and go into inventory. A lot of people ask how I show my loot like this, or my inventory like this. If I go into any slot, you can see it's kind of like in two columns. And to do this, when you're in and you're looking at your loot, if you just bring up your options with X, you're able to change the way the grid is. You can view the grid like I do, or you can view which is called grid, or you can view it in a list. List looks like this by default, so when you go in, you got to scroll through everything, and I really like this, and I found it hard to come away from that, to be honest with you. We go back into options. I switched to this after people said just do it. It's easier to manage your inventory. It really is. I got used to this and I like it. So that's how you do it. And next, a lot of people ask, how do you show your mask or your signature weapon? They've made this much easier now. When I'm talking about mask, by the way, I'm not on about apparel items and the masks you put on here. If you select any of these and equip them, they are always going to show. But if you have no apparel mask equipped, you're also able to show whatever mask you've got in your mask slot. And so Coyote one is great to use. And now it's as easy as this. If you just click on the Coyote's mask and just go back to the inventory menu, make sure it's highlighted. You'll notice in the bottom right hand corner, I can just press X to show it. Now, if I show the mask, that is going to be showing at all times. If we come back out of my menu, you can see my Coyote mask is on me, or whatever other mask you have in the mask slot. Some people really like that because there are some cool masks that are not apparel, and that's how you do that, just by pressing that. On console, it'll be a different button. It'll be in the bottom right hand corner when you're on this menu. You can show mask and you hide mask from here. And signature weapon as well, you can also show and hide your signature weapon. So if you look at my character now, my grenade launcher specialization is showing. Again, from the inventory menu, if I just highlight the specialization at the top, you just press X again or whatever it is on console. You can hide it or you can show it. A lot of people like it hidden, so I'm just going to hide it. And then when I come out, you'll notice the grenade launcher specialization has been removed. And finally, the PC crashing issue. Quite notorious. It was very bad a couple of years ago. It's much better than it is now, but there is still crashing. And I spoke about like the one fix you can try, which is turning the DX12 renderer off. That does help for most. There's one more thing. Shout out to Sicario in stream chat last week who told me about this. And he said if I did this with the anti-cheat, a lot of people have success with this, and this stops the crashing. So let me show you what you can do every time you load up the game. So you will need to do it every time you load up. It's unfortunate, but if it does work for you, it'll be worth it, right? So once you've loaded up the game, if you Control Alt and Delete, you'll bring up your task manager, and from the task manager you want to click on details on the left hand side, and what you're looking for here is the anti-cheat for the Division 2, and the anti-cheat for the Division 2 is easy anti-cheat. Now, I'm guessing the anti-cheat is probably one of the reasons that some crashes are happening, which is why this can help and be a fix. What you want to do is right-click on Easy Anti-Cheat in this menu, and you want to set an affinity. Once you do that, you'll notice by default, all of your processors are being used. If you uncheck that and just check the top processor and you're only using one of them, select OK, and apparently this will help with a lot of the crashing issues. As I said, I only found this out last week from Sicario in stream chat, and when I did it, I didn't get a crash for the rest of that stream. So whether that's coincidence or not, I don't know. I haven't really done it since, but a lot of people was backing up that comment and said it did help them. So you've got that option. You've also got the DX12 renderer you can turn off, and if you do get a lot of crashes on the Division 2, I hope one of them do help your situation. Do remember though, PC crashing is a notorious issue that is never going to be fixed entirely, I believe. So I think you're always going to get the odd crash, and obviously there's other things that'll make the game crash as well. There's a bugging countdown where you can get a crash anyway, regardless. And then sometimes your system could just have a fault or something that you need to fix, which is why games are crashing. If you're crashing across a lot of games, it's probably something you need to look at your system. But there are some tips there that may be able to help, and that does bring us to the end of this settings video for the Division 2 in 2024. I hope I learned you something new today. Let me know in the comments. Drop some tips down in the comments for settings that you like as well, in case people are going to read through them. And thank you for watching. Again, I hope it's been helpful. Smash like, hit subscribe for more content from me. And if you want some more beginner guides for the Division 2 in 2024, there's a playlist link down below in the video description. I have a lot of beginner guides for returning players as well, all linked down there, so go and check them out. Until next time, thank you for watching. Take care and peace out.